Look, when you buy a house in a planned community, you expect some rules. What you don't expect is Martha the Meter Williamson showing up at 7:15 a.m. on a Tuesday to inform you that your mailbox is exhibiting a 3.2-degree lean towards socialism. That's what my wife, Emily, told me our first week in Serenity Pines. I was still unpacking boxes from 20 years of Marine Corps service, dreaming of retirement spent fishing and maybe growing tomatoes, when Emily handed me the notice. It wasn't paper. It was parchment with a wax seal. I kid you not. Actual sealing wax with the HOA logo pressed into it. Violation 14G, Emily read, her voice that particular mix of amusement and rage I'd come to recognize over 22 years of marriage. Mailbox posture must reflect community uprightness standards. Non-compliance fine, $75 for degree of deviation. I stared at the mailbox. It looked perfectly upright to me. But then again, after 2 decades of Marine Corps inspections, everything looked a little crooked. You're telling me, I said slowly, that Martha Williamson, the woman with the peacock topiary shaped like former presidents, measured our mailbox's political alignment? With a protractor, Emily confirmed. She showed me the photos. Thus began what we'd later call the Great Serenity Pines Uprising, Operation Garden Freedom, or, as the local news dubbed it, Lawnmower Gate. Chapter 1, Martha's Manifesto. Martha Williamson wasn't just HOA president. She was Serenity Pines' self-appointed sovereign, a woman who believed neighborhood aesthetics were next to godliness, and that her godliness was above everyone else's. 58 years old, with a rigid posture of Victorian governess and a fashion sense of a Nancy Reagan impersonator, Martha governed from her White House, a McMansion painted exactly one shade whiter than the HOA-approved Cloud Whisper White. Her rule book, the Serenity Standards, was thicker than the Marine Corps manual and twice as unreasonable. Where the Marines had regulations about uniform appearance, Martha had regulations about uniform grass blades. Take Chapter 7, Subsection D, Lawn Maintenance and Moral Fiber. Grass shall be maintained at a height of no less than 1.5 inches and no more than 2.25 inches, except during drought conditions. See Appendix Q for drought determination flowchart. Blades must be cut at a consistent angle, with preference given to diagonal patterns that inspire upward momentum. Grass clippings must be removed within 2 hours to prevent declarations of slovenliness. I read this aloud to Emily over coffee. Diagonal patterns that inspire upward momentum? What does that even mean? It means she's insane, Emily said, stirring her coffee. But she's insane with a gavel and the ability to fine us $200 for inspirational deficiency. Our neighbor, Carl, retired engineer, conspiracy theorist, leaned over the fence. You know why, don't you? Enlighten us, Carl. Martha's husband, Richard, owns Precision Cut Lawn Services. They charge double what anyone else does, but if you don't use them, suddenly your grass is inspirationally deficient. It was the oldest racket in the book. Create a problem, sell the solution. But Martha's tyranny wasn't just financial. It was psychological. She'd instituted a neighborhood shame scroll, an actual scroll she commissioned from a calligrapher, that listed weekly violations in Old English script. For $50, you could have your name removed before the Sunday community walk. For $100, Martha would personally rehabilitate your property's reputation. It's extortion with floral arrangements. I told Emily. Marine, she said, using the nickname she called me since our first date. What are you going to do about it? 20 years of service had taught me something about dealing with bullies. They only understand 2 things: overwhelming force and meticulous documentation. I started with the documentation. Chapter 2, The Garden Variety Conspiracy. The first battle came over tomatoes. Emily had planted 3 tomato plants in our backyard, not in the front yard where they might offend sensibilities, not in some visible display of agricultural rebellion. 3 simple plants against the back fence. Martha's violation notice arrived via courier. I'm not joking. An actual kid on a bicycle with a satchel. Violation 22B, unauthorized vegetable manifestation. Fruit/vegetables may only be grown in HOA-approved raised beds. See specifications pamphlet 7C for approved dimensions. Using HOA-approved soil, available through Serenity Soil Solutions, a subsidiary of Williamson Properties. Fine, $150 per plant, plus mandatory aesthetic consultation. I called Carl. She's finding us for tomatoes. Did you use the approved soil? Is there actually approved soil? Carl sighed. Martha's brother-in-law owns a landscaping supply company. The approved soil is just regular potting mix with a 400% markup. That afternoon, I attended my first HOA meeting. It was held in Martha's living room, which looked less like a home and more like a museum exhibit titled Beige, a Lifestyle. 20 of us sat on white slip-covered furniture, afraid to move. Martha presided from a wingback chair on a raised platform. I'm not making this up, a platform. The tomato situation, she began, adjusting her reading glasses, reflects a deeper issue of nonconformity. Vegetables, while nutritionally valuable, project an image of need, of scarcity. Serenity Pines is about abundance, about curated natural beauty, not, she shuddered, agriculture. An elderly man named Harold raised a trembling hand. But Martha, my wife and I, we've always grown tomatoes. Harold, Martha cut him off. Your tomatoes last year were visibly asymmetrical. They broadcast disorder. The meeting continued like a Soviet-era show trial. Mrs. Henderson was cited for excessive bird feeder enthusiasm. The Millers were fined because their welcome mat said hello instead of the approved welcome. I raised my hand. Martha, where in the bylaws does it specify mat messaging? She smiled, the kind of smile a snake might give a mouse. Section 45, subparagraph H. Front entrance accoutrements must reflect Serenity Pines' ethos of warm but not effusive hospitality. Hello is effusive. Welcome is appropriately measured. I looked around the room. 20 homeowners, all professionals, doctors, engineers, teachers, sitting in terrified silence, being lectured about welcome mat semantics. That's when I noticed something. Every time someone questioned Martha, she'd reference the committee's decision. But there was no committee. There was just Martha. After the meeting, I approached her. Martha, I'd like to see the minutes from a committee meeting where these decisions were made. Her smile tightened. The committee's deliberations are confidential, to protect the integrity of the process. Which committee member should I talk to? The committee, she said, turning away, prefers to remain anonymous for their protection. That night, I started digging. Marine Corps intelligence training isn't just for combat zones. Sometimes it's for suburban battlefields. Chapter 3, The Paper Trail to Madness. My first discovery. Serenity Pines Homeowners Association was incorporated in 1985. The original covenants were reasonable. No junkyards. Keep your property tidy. That sort of thing. But over the years, Martha had added amendments. Hundreds of them. The amendment process, according to the bylaws, required a 2/3 majority vote of homeowners. I requested voting records from the past 15 years. Martha's response: voting records are part of the committee's confidential deliberations. I filed a formal request with the county. As a registered corporation, HOAs are required to maintain certain records. Martha fought me for 3 months, but eventually, the county compelled her to produce the documents. What I found was breathtaking. Of the 237 amendments added to the Serenity standards over 15 years, only 12 had actually been voted on. The rest? Martha had added them unilaterally, claiming emergency aesthetic authority. The approved vendor lists were even more revealing. Every single approved vendor, from lawn services to painters to roofers, was connected to Martha's family. Her husband, her brother-in-law, her cousin, her nephew. It was a perfect little feudal economy. Martha created the rules. Her family sold compliance. But the real gold mine came from Carl, who'd been conducting his own investigation. You know how she always references property value studies to justify her rules? Carl asked one evening over beers in my garage. Yeah. Studies show that non-diagonal lawn patterns decrease property values by 3.7%. Carl pulled out his tablet. I tracked down those studies. They don't exist. But guess what does exist? Martha's real estate license and her side business selling houses in Serenity Pines. He showed me the data. Over the past decade, Martha had personally handled 80% of home sales in the neighborhood. Every time someone moved out, usually after battling with her over violations, Martha was the listing agent. And every time, she'd buy the house herself through an LLC, make approved renovations, and flip it for 20 to 30% more. She's not protecting property values. I realized she's manufacturing turnover to make money on commissions and flips. Emily looked at Carl's spreadsheet. She's running the neighborhood like a company town. We're not homeowners. We're tenants in Marthaville. Chapter 4, Operation Lawn Freedom. We needed proof. More than spreadsheets. We needed what the Marines call irrefutable battlefield evidence. I recruited allies, not through some dramatic speech, but over backyard fences and at mailboxes. There was Harold, the tomato grower, who'd paid over $4,000 in fines and consultation fees in 2 years. The Chun family, fined for having a two-ethnic garden their crime, planting bok choy. Mrs. Henderson, whose excessive bird feeder enthusiasm citation came after she refused to buy birdseed from Martha's nephew's approved wildlife nourishment company. We formed what Carl called the Underground Garden Committee. Our first act of rebellion was beautiful in its simplicity. We all planted one unauthorized plant, not tomatoes, something bolder. I planted lavender, not in the approved raised bed, right in the front yard. The horror. Harold planted zucchini. The Chens planted actual bamboo, which yes spreads, but the point was made. Mrs. Henderson didn't just add another bird feeder. She added 7, and painted them rainbow colors. The violation notices flooded in. Martha's wax-sealed parchment rained down upon Serenity Pines, like some absurd medieval tax decree. We didn't pay them. Instead, we requested hearings. Every single one. Martha's Compliance Tribunal was a masterpiece of bureaucratic theater, held in her living room, with Martha as judge, jury, and executioner. Her evidence was always the same. Photographed from angles that made violations look worse, printouts of studies from websites she'd apparently created herself, and a clipboard with a running tally of our community integrity scores. At my hearing for the lavender, Martha presented her case. Lavender, she announced, while fragrant, attracts bees. Bees represent uncontrolled natural processes. Furthermore, purple is not among the approved Serenity Pines color palette. I brought my own evidence. Martha, your own garden has wisteria, which also attracts bees, and it's purple. My wisteria, she said icily, is a historical varietal approved by the committee in 2003. Your lavender is French. The absurdity was the point. She wasn't just enforcing rules. She was demonstrating power. After 6 hearings, we amassed hours of recordings. California is a 2-party consent state, so we'd announced we were recording. Martha's flustered reactions were priceless, and a mountain of contradictory rulings. Then came the breakthrough. Chapter 5, The Platform Incident. Martha's raised platform in her living room, the throne from which she dispensed aesthetic justice. It bothered me. Not just the arrogance, but the construction. I'm no contractor, but 20 years in the Marines teaches you to notice things, like how that platform seemed new, and how Martha's house, unlike every other house in Serenity Pines, had a sunroom that definitely wasn't in the original plans. I pulled the building permits for Martha's property from the county website. There were none. Not for the platform. Not for the sunroom. Not for the massive fountain in her backyard shaped like Neptune judging lesser mortals. Martha, the queen of permits and approvals, had built an entire wing of her house without a single permit. But even better was what Carl discovered in the HOA's financial records, which Martha had been forced to release after we threatened legal action. Look at this, Carl said, pointing at a line item. Community Beautification Fund, $2,500 monthly expenditure. What's that pay for? According to the records, professional landscaping services for common areas. But we don't have professional landscaping, Emily said. We all pay teenagers to mow the common areas. Exactly, Carl said. But look where the money goes. Williamson Properties Management. Martha was paying herself $2,500 a month to landscape common areas that were already being maintained by residents. That's when we found the smoking gun, or rather, the smoking sprinkler. Chapter 12 of the Serenity Standards required all homes to install water-conserving irrigation systems from Aquaflow Solutions, Martha's brother-in-law's company. Cost, $8,000 minimum. Harold, who'd been an engineer for 40 years, looked at the system specifications. This isn't water-conserving, he said. This is 1980s technology. It uses 40% more water than standard systems. We tested it. We measured water usage. We had experts write reports. Martha wasn't just running a racket. She was mandating environmentally harmful systems to enrich her family. That's when we went from defense to offense. Chapter 6, the Board Rebellion. The Serenity Pines HOA had a board, 5 members. But for years, they'd been rubber stamps. Until we recruited Linda. Linda was a retired corporate lawyer who'd moved in 6 months earlier and immediately been fined for having too assertive exterior lighting. She'd been quietly researching HOA law ever since. Here's the thing. Linda told our growing resistance group, now meeting in rotating backyards like some suburban French resistance. California Civil Code 5200 through 5300, the Davis-Sterling Act. It gives homeowners rights, real rights. She laid out the plan. First, demand a proper election. The board positions hadn't been contested in a decade. Second, run candidates. Linda would run for president. I'd run for architectural committee. Harold for landscaping. Third, expose the financials. Not just to our neighborhood, but to everyone. We printed newsletters, not emails, actual paper newsletters delivered to every door, with charts and photographs and quotes from Martha's hearings. Did you know your community beautification fund pays Martha's family $30,000 a year for landscaping that does exist? Did you know the proved irrigation system wastes enough water annually to fill an Olympic pool? Did you know Martha has built without permits what she would fine you $10,000 for? Martha fought back. Oh, how she fought. Violation notices became daily. My lavender was now creating a visual disturbance. Harold's zucchini were exhibiting aggressive growth patterns. The Chen's bamboo was displaying cultural insensitivity. She called an emergency board meeting to ban divisive literature distribution. We showed up with 20 homeowners, and Linda cited the relevant laws, and we recorded everything. The turning point came when Martha tried to have me fined for militaristic demeanor. It's the way he stands, she told the board. It's intimidating. It doesn't reflect Serenity Pines' ethos of gentle coexistence. Linda didn't even smile. Martha, are you fining a retired Marine for standing with proper posture? It's the principle. The principle, Linda cut her off, is that you're abusing your authority, and we have the votes to stop you. The election was scheduled for the first Sunday in May. Martha campaigned like a politician facing revolution, which she was. She hosted community harmony teas, where she served tiny sandwiches and explained why oversight was really oppression. She mailed glossy brochures showing Serenity Pines' perfect property values growth under her leadership. She even hired a PR consultant who suggested she soften her image. The result was Martha wearing pastels and trying to smile in a way that looked like she was tasting something sour. We campaigned with facts, spreadsheets, photographs, comparisons between what we paid and what we got. Election day arrived. Martha insisted on paper ballots, counted in her living room. We insisted on observers. The compromise was a locked ballot box, open in the community clubhouse with everyone watching. When the votes were counted, Martha lost every position. Linda became president. I headed the architectural committee. Harold got landscaping. Martha sat perfectly still as the results were announced, her face a mask of calm that didn't reach her eyes. The community has spoken, she said, standing. I will, of course, facilitate a smooth transition. We thought we'd won. We had no idea Martha was just switching battlefields. Chapter 7. The Great Garden Gate Conspiracy. 2 weeks after the election, the notices started appearing. Not from the HOA. From the city. Code violations. Dozens of them. My lavender was suddenly creating a fire hazard. Harold zucchini were violating setback requirements. The Chen's bamboo was an invasive species threatening city property. Every single member of our resistance group received city code violations within a 3-day period. "It's Martha," Carl said. "She's friend with someone at city planning." We checked. Martha's college roommate was the head of the city's code compliance department. Linda filed public records requests. The violations had all been submitted by concerned citizen reports. The reports were anonymous, but the language was unmistakably Martha's. The lavender exhibits flammable exuberance. We fought each violation, took photographs, hired independent inspectors, went to city hearings. It was costing us thousands, which was, of course, the point. Then came the masterpiece. A city inspector showed up at my door. "We've received reports of an unpermitted structure." He walked into my backyard, pointed at my tool shed, the tool shed that had been there when we bought the house, the tool shed mentioned in the property disclosures. "Needs a permit," he said, "for a shed. Any structure over 120 square feet requires a permit. This is 121. I measured 120.5. The half-inch was apparently critical. The permit process required architectural drawings, soil tests, and a $1,200 fee. That's when I had my Marine Corps moment. You know what they teach you about entrenched enemies? Don't fight them where they're strong. Force them to fight where they're weak. Martha's weakness was her own property. I hired a surveyor. Not just any surveyor. The most meticulous, detail-obsessed surveyor in 3 counties. "We're looking for anything," I told him. "Anything not permitted. Anything not to code." He found everything. The sunroom? 200 square feet over the maximum allowable without a variance, which Martha had never obtained. The platform in her living room? Changed the home's occupancy classification. Required permits she didn't have. The Neptune fountain? Violated water conservation ordinances. The peacock topiaries? Actually violated city code about structures resembling living creatures in residential zones. A law meant to prevent giant dinosaur statues, but still, we compiled the evidence. Not to use against her. To show her we could. Linda arranged a meeting. At a neutral location, a coffee shop. Martha arrived wearing what I can only describe as casual intimidation. Designer athleisure, where that probably cost more than my first car. "I assume," she said, not sitting, "this is about the unfortunate city misunderstanding." "It's about mutually assured destruction," Linda said, sliding a folder across the table. Martha opened it, flipped through the pages. Surveyor reports, photographs, code citations. Her face didn't change, but her knuckles went white around the folder. "You built a sunroom without permits," Linda said calmly. "The fines alone will be tens of thousands, not to mention having to remove it." Martha closed the folder. "What do you want?" "First," I said, "you call off your city contacts. All the violations disappear. Second," Linda added, "you resign from all HOA committees permanently. Third," Harold said, we'd brought him for moral support, "you refund every fine you levy without proper committee approval. Every consultation fee. Every penny." Martha laughed. It wasn't a pleasant sound. "You can't prove." "We have bank records," Linda said. "We have testimony. We have 15 years of committee minutes that don't exist. We go to the DA with this. It's not just fines. It's fraud." Silence. The coffee shop's espresso machine hissed like a disappointed cat. "Fine," Martha said finally, "but the election stands. You won fair and square." She stood to leave. "One more thing," I said. "The tool shed." She turned, eyebrow arched. "I want it permitted. Officially. With your help." "Why would I help you?" "Because," I said, "every time you look at that shed, you'll remember you didn't win." Martha's smile was thin and sharp. "The shed is 121 square feet. The permit requires it be 120 or less. I'm aware, so you'll have to remove it or rebuild it. Or, I said, I could apply for a variance, which requires HOA approval, which you could help expedite. Understanding dawned in her eyes. She would have to help me get permission for something she tried to use against me. Marines, she said, almost admiringly. You never quit, do you? Not when there's justice to be served, I said. Epilogue, a new serenity. Martha resigned next day. Her letter was a masterpiece of non-apology, citing a desire to spend more time with family and explore new horizons. Her family sold their landscaping and irrigation businesses within 6 months. The Serenity standards were rewritten by actual homeowners, at actual public meetings, with actual votes. The new rules fit on 3 pages. Basically, don't be a jerk, mow your lawn sometimes, and for God's sake, grow whatever vegetables you want. My tool shed got its variance. It's 121 square feet of permitted glory. I painted it lavender. Harold grows tomatoes, zucchini, and now pumpkins, so large they should probably require their own permit. The Chen's bamboo is thriving, contained in beautiful planters. Mrs. Henderson's bird feeders are a rainbow spectacle that actually increase bird diversity in the neighborhood. And Martha, she moved to a gated community with even stricter rules. Last I heard, she's leading the charge to ban garden gnomes for promoting unrealistic height expectations. Sometimes on my morning walk, I pass her old house. The new owners painted it a cheerful yellow, not an approved color, but they asked for forgiveness instead of permission. They have a vegetable garden in the front yard and a welcome mat that says, "Howdy," the most effusive greeting imaginable. Emily and I sit on our porch most evenings watching the neighborhood. Kids play in yards that don't have to be perfectly manicured. People plant flowers because they like them, not because they're approved. The only measuring tapes are for DIY projects. Marine, Emily said recently, squeezing my hand, "You won the war." Not just me, I said. We all did. Because that's the thing about bullies, whether they're on battlefields or in suburban neighborhoods. They count on isolation, on making you think you're alone. But when you realize you're not, when you find your allies, when you stand together, that's when the tyranny ends. And sometimes, if you're lucky, you get a really good tomato out of the deal.